Hey, everybody. Michael here with a fan favorite Golgari Death Shadow. Uh, Another fun little league off stream. Wanted to showcase some of the new Golgari tech, and by new tech, I mean just like cards I'm messing around with. So some of the changes since the last time we really checked out the archetype was I've added these two tireless trackers in the main. Hopefully, give a little more pop, a little more card draw as the game goes on, messing around with some of these slots that we can tutor off of Saga. I played Hex Parasite a little bit. Was okay, nothing special. Really good against like opposing sagas, but you also just have Haywire Might. The best thing Hex Parasite can do is, of course, being able to lose 2 life over and over again to grow your shadows in a pinch, but without like a battle rage effect, it's really difficult to take advantage of that. Ended up cutting a Dark Confidant for one of the trackers, and then cut the Hex Parasite for the second tracker. Mainly just cutting some threats that are a little too easy to deal with for some tougher to deal with stuff. In the sideboard, added in 2 copies of Orvar the All Form for the creativity matchup. I think I was playing the Bitter Blossoms last time, but they're in there for like scam for any sort of 1-for-1 removal mid range deck for Murktide, stuff like that. And added a second copy of Beseiju in the board. I cannot remember what over, but just to have a little extra help against like Leyline Bindings and Tron and random stuff like that. So let's go ahead and get rolling with the league. Through the power of CGI, we get old video off the board. And round number 1. So we lose the die roll. Unfortunate. Pretty good opening hand, though. We've got some interaction. We've got Tireless Tracker, Mishra's Bauble to help get our graveyard filled. We're just kind of looking for a threat. Hey, look, it's a threat. So now we're able to like turn 1 hand disruption, turn 2 Tarmogoyf. We see our opponent's got a couple seasoned Pyromancers and a Leyline Binding. Saga, really nice pickup there. So with all these hand disruption spells, I'm just like going to go ahead and take the opportunity to empty out their hand. We see the Witch's Cottage, so we know on like turn 4 they will be able to cottage back a Spyro if they want to. I'm just kind of hoping that by that point I've got Tarmogoyf rolling, maybe I've got Tireless Tracker going, and hopefully that Spyro will just be like a little bit too slow at that point. So we do get to Infernal Grasp away a Scion of Draco. And then the Traverse finds us another Saga. They decide to put back the Spyro and the Scion in subsequent turns, which is fine because with this Saga ditching itself, then we get Shadow Spear, and we're just going to like do a really good job of beating our opponent in the face with a 7/8 lifelink trampling Tarmogoyf. Blind Flip Calibrated Blast hits a Lightning Bolt. Goes to show that if you're not calibrated blasting into like Emrakul's and Shadow of Mortalities, then probably not worth it as a magic card. But sideboarding against Calibrated Blast took out a bunch of like the Fatal Pushes. Pretty sure I just brought in like the extra Beseiju. I brought in what did I bring in? Unlicensed Hearse to fight over Calibrated Blast in the graveyard, as well as like cottage targets. Something else. Either way, opponent hits us with a Dolthy game 2. Was not really prepared for the Dolthy. Like we kept in a good bit of our removal, but I also saw a Calibrated Blast opponent in one of the last leagues bring in a Territorial Kavu. So if you're playing against this deck in one of your leagues, I'd probably advise like keeping in a Fatal Push or 2 because it looks like they're trying to go for a bit of a sideboard juke. Like you take out all of your Fatal Pushes because they got Shadow of Mortality and Scion of Draco, and they just hit you with like 2 mana value threats. So keep an eye on that. Opponent fetches and shocks. I assume they were planning on Leyline binding and just like decided not to, but either way, they untap, double binding my 2 non-threats, and then Fury away my actual threats, which is fine because this means we just get down like a really good threat. We empty their hand with the Thoughtseize that we top deck, and now it's just like Goyf E Draco, which is pretty fine with us. Opponent whiffs on their top deck, and we're kind of cruising. So we could just like make another Saga there, untap, get a Haywire Might, take out a Saga, get Shadow Spear back, strap up the Shadow Spear, and off to the races. Match number 2, we're on the draw again. Opponent leads off with an Arboreal Grazer, so we're assuming Amulet Titan. We do have a Haywire Might to take out this Urza Saga or an Amulet, so that's kind of cool. Let's see. What did Inquisition see? Pretty sure it was a kind of dull Inquisition. Let's back up a little bit. All right. So we are going to Inquisition them. So yeah, it's just like an Amulet and a few lands. So free take on the Amulet. Hopefully we can Haywire Might the Urza Saga next turn, which not only strip mines them, it also stops them from getting an Amulet so they can't Mycosynth Garden to copy it. So hopefully this will slow them down enough to where we can like regain a couple of these turns. If we can find a fetch land, we can get Delirium online. But if we don't, then we still just have like Dark Confidant. We know that they just top decked a Summoner's Pact, so we get the free discard on that. Fatal Push and a fetch land. Either one of them gives us Delirium. And yeah, so reasonable spot. We've got like Tireless Tracker fighting in. We've got the Dark Confidant drawing his cards. Our life total's fairly safe. We've got Assassin's Trophy to take out like a Titan if they find one. This is kind of what we're hoping for with Tireless Tracker, is just having like another strong threat that can kind of help close out the games. Crack ourselves a clue here. It looks like opponent's just making us go to combat. I don't think there's anything they can have that stops us from killing them, but they probably want to see if maybe we flip over a 5-drop with Dark Confidant. Unfortunately for our opponent, we only have 2 3-drops in the deck, and one of them's on board, so we're not in a position to kill ourselves with the Dark Confidant. Sideboarding against Amulet Titan, taking out things like Might Trim on a Fatal Push or 2, Might Trim on an Inquisition or 2. What else? Dark Confidant can be a little sketchy with Arboreal Grazer, but it's still like a very good card advantage engine. Bringing in the extra Beseiju, the extra Haywire Might. Yeah, it's not really a lot to board in or out for this matchup. So Thoughtseize leaves them with a Summoner's Pact. It's usually pretty important to leave them with Pact instead of Titan, because if we draw an Inquisition, we can take Pact. But if we leave them with the Titan and we draw an Inquisition, we can't take that. So either way, opponent does end up finding another copy of a Titan effect. So not a great spot for us. Hold up Fatal Push in case we need to Fatal Push a Shadow to get Revolt to Fatal Push a Dryad of the Elysian Grove. Not the most exciting use of Fatal Push, but you got to do what you got to do to stay alive, right? I could have blocked here and seen if they'd assign the trample damage to me and let the shadow live, but I kind of was hoping that maybe I get an opportunity to like find a fetch land, fatal push the grazer, and have lethal. Um, but with them just like getting more titans, that's pretty unlikely. All right. So expecting a dryad. I wish we had a way to get revolt here, but unfortunately we do not. With our opponent getting Teleria West and a Valakut, I'm assuming that they're gonna go ahead and transmute, get a dryad. There are 2 summoners packs in. Yeah, so they do get dryad. Throw a bolt at us. We There's not really anything we can do to I guess we found like a Mishra's Bauble. We could untap, kill the Dryad, and have 2 shadows, but not a very reliable plan. Either way, we're gonna make them go to attacks, kind of like they did to us game 1. Just make sure that they do everything correctly. If they did mess up and like assign trample damage to 1 shadow and then uh trample over the second one, then maybe we'd have a chance to find a removal spell. But all they really have to do is assign trample damage to us twice. And eventually, opponent will sun home us to death. So throw a couple blocks. And yep. All right, on to game 3. Again, not much of a change. Just boarding out some of the dead cards. Here, this is a kind of a fun hand. We've got Thoughtseize, obviously. We've got, let's take a look at the Thoughtseize decision. Through the magic of CGI, we rewind. All right, so opponent's got a map that we take, a couple of arboreal grazers, and a bunch of lands. I think one of these, the second arboreal grazer, or no, the Beseiju we saw off the top of their library. But this is just one of those opening hands where, like, you've got the turn 1 Thoughtseize. You really hope you draw a second land to get down Goyf, but if you don't draw one, you can always traverse for a land. But if we are able to find, like, fetch land and maybe a removal spell or something, then we can get Delirium online for traverse very quickly. Abrupt Decay is fine. That'll allow us to take out an Amulet when they tutor off this Urza Saga. Or we just like Haywire Might and Strip Mine the Saga, which also grows our Tarmogoyf. So hey, we get to go from a little Goyf to a slightly less little Goyf. But more importantly, we take them off that Saga so we don't have to worry about Mycosynth Gardens anytime soon. Another Arboreal Grazer. Since they are going up to 4 mana next turn, I shouldn't have to worry about a Titan. So I'm going for the Tireless Tracker in case I hit a land next turn. I can double spell with like Goyf and Decay or Goyf and Push or whatever. Plus, if I had the tracker down, if I hit a fetch land, that's really good for me. Titan, little unfortunate for us. It's not the end of the world. We do have like a reasonable board presence. And if we can top deck an Infernal Grasp, then that would be pretty cool, right? 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 So, you know what they say, better lucky than good. The Infernal Grasp lets us put them down to 1. We're not dead to another Titan. We can actually attack around a Titan very well. So, when opponent turn Timber Symbiosis into a Titan, we're kind of okay there. All right, match number 3, I think. We'll kind of go over mulligan decisions, I guess, briefly. The first hand was, yeah, first hand had a threat, has map that could go get a saga, but it's just a very, very slow hand to develop and doesn't have any real like oomph. So I'm pretty okay throwing this back just in the spirit of being more proactive. Like I've got 7 1-mana discard spells plus Tarmogoyfs and Dark Confidants and all that. That I really feel like I don't need to keep a hand that's this slow. This hand, 1 land, no colored mana, pretty easy shit. This one we can at least like traverse for our swamp. We've got Saga, Thoughtseize, Push. Don't know what we're up against, but I want to go ahead and get this Saga down because if I'm able to make a couple constructs, that's going to be better for me. Blackcleave Cliffs and Swamp makes me think some sort of like a scam deck. There's no companion revealed. I thought about going for like Expedition Map and Inquisition here. Like, I get kind of messed up by Blood Moon, but at the same time, I've got my basic swamp. Expedition Map can get my basic forest. So I'm not just like out of the woods by any means. And now I've got Haywire Might that can take out the Blood Moon. But opponent's going to have the ability to just start hard casting Griefs, which is a little annoying. They take our Assassin's Trophy, but we can Haywire Might, blow up the Blood Moon, and Fatal Push the Grief. So, reasonable turn. Thoughtseize strips our Fatal Push. So, we're just kind of like a little at the mercy of our top decks. We know they're down to a Shieldred's Edict, and they've got this Grief coming off the top here. Take Gigantha. So they're assuming that they're just going to be able to like Shieldred's Edict the Shadow if we get that down. Thoughtseize and Goyf means we get to take the Edict, but we don't have a second black source to get Shadow down. And of course, Spyro is a pretty good draw for them. So our only out here was like Shadow Spear, and even that I don't think would be enough with like the Menace and the Shadow threat. But either way, go to game 2. Sideboarding against Scam, bringing out a bunch of like Hand Disruption, bringing in Bitter Blossom, Terra Sunders for like Blood Moons and unlicensed hearses and stuff like that. And then I think this game I brought in Orvar because I saw Colligan's Command. I think against like Grief and Thoughtseize, Orvar is not good enough. But against something like Colligan's Command or Liliana of the Veil, then maybe it is. And I kind of wanted to try it out here. So we do get down Bitter Blossom. Thoughteize, a little unfortunate. Obviously, I needed them to like miss the land drop for another turn or two, but that's kind of asking a lot. And they're just going to be able to kind of outrace with this Dauthi. Kind of a funny situation here. So I can't hit them for lethal, obviously. I find a Haywire Might, which would allow me to like exile my own Bitter Blossom, gain a couple life. Unfortunately, that's not enough to live through a Dauthi hit. So the other option is play the land, crack the clue, and try to find a Fatal Push. But then if I do that, I'm dead to my own Bitter Blossom trigger. So I really don't have an out here. But for the record, I don't know if it shows it on the stream or not. But I did hit the little draw card button and see what my next card was, and it was a Fatal Push. So I could have killed the Dolthy, but like I said, I would have been dead to the Bitter Blossom trigger. Uh, I think that one was kind of like an unfortunate situation that our opponent had Dolthy specifically. If we'd had a 1-mana removal spell, I probably would take the Dolthy, kill the Ragavan, then get down the Bitter Blossom, but oh well. All right, so this is round number 4. Opponent reveals a Keruga, so it's some sort of like 4 or 5 color elemental mid-range pile something, magic something. So of course we've got Inquisition in our hand, which completely whiffs. Not a 3-drop to be seen. Get down Goyf. I figure we can spellbomb their yard to stop this murderous cut that we saw of Inquisition. Like, Goyf's still reasonably sized, so I'm not too worried about knocking out card types. Saga, I think, just gets like just get a map, go find more lands. I could go get another Saga, but I don't think that really matters too much. Haywire Might down. I did want the fetch land to be able to revolt to kill the Omnath before they get a bunch of mana off of it as well. Mana and the life gain. Maybe this was a bit aggressive, but I felt like if I Haywire Mighted the Leyline Binding, they'd be able to kill the Tarmogoyf anyway with Murderous Cut, especially since they'd be able to Omnath plus a fetch land, have plenty of mana. So Teferi's decent, Risen Reef is decent. Really need to find like a fetch land to get Shadows online. Dark Confidant could be better, could be worse, but either way, here's a Confidant. We're just like chilling with these shadows. I don't really want to play out double shadow and have my opponent like Solitude. I don't even know if they're on Solitude, but I kind of assume they are. And then untapping with my opponent having a Teferi and Omnath, no way to deal with either of them. I think it's fair to just like scoop, go to game 2. Sideboarding against the big elemental pile like this, usually trimming on like fatal pushes. I might keep 1 or 2 in because they do deal with Risen Reef and Omnath. I'll trim on some of the hand disruption, like the Inquisitions, because not only it's gonna miss a lot, but I want more spells that like actually impact the board, impact the game. So we get turn 1, Haywire Might, so we can like protect this Bitter Blossom a bit from a Leyline Binding. Get Confidant down. We've got the Fatal Push for Risen Reef if we can find Delirium. Not Delirium, Revolt. But even if we don't like this, we can just kind of like crack in with the Confidant. Like, what's the opponent going to do? Block it? Shadow ends up getting 3 for 2. They exile our Confidant, get both the Shadows. I kind of figured I needed to be proactive, and I've got this backup Shadow anyway, so I'm not like, oh my god, it's the end of the world because they got rid of my Shadows. I go for Endurance, so we're going to have the Fatal Push on the Endurance. Pretty okay if opponent like trades off Risen Reef for a dude. But again, they don't. So we'll just hang on to Assassin's Trophy, Terrace under this turn. If opponent goes for an Omnath, we can trophy it. Or maybe like a, what's it called? Elish Norn. But if they don't, then we do outrace quite a bit with these tokens. Here's Shadows. So Keruga is pretty fine. I'm going to Assassin's Trophy the Risen Reef, mainly so they just don't get a draw of Keruga. Like, I know Keruga's not an elemental, so it doesn't trigger the Risen Reef, but Keruga triggers whenever your opponent has a non-land permanent with CMC 3 or greater. So it would draw a card with the Risen Reef, and I think that the only way my opponent like wins the game from here is drawing more cards. But I think they're going to have a really tough time dealing with like the Bitter Blossom and the tokens, unless they happen to have a Fury. But I feel like if they had a Fury, they would have cast it. But either way, they end up like firing down a couple tokens, Solitude my Shadow, which is fine. That's just more Bitter Blossom tokens, right? And we managed to get there game 2. Game 3, really, really risky hand out of me. I figure like it's not a good matchup anyway because they've got Solitudes and Furies and Omnaths and Leyline Bindings and like all the things we don't want to see. So the upside of this hand is I've got Fetch Land, Double Thoughtseize, Shadow, Infernal Grasp. And I always tell people that one of my favorite things about the Death Shadow archetype is no matter how bad the matchup is, no matter how many removal spells they play or wrath effects or whatever, there's always that chance that you can have an opening hand of just like Fetch Shock Thoughtseize, Fetch Shock Shadow, Fetch Shock removal spell attack, or Fetch Shock another Thoughtseize, whatever the case may be, and just kill them in like 2 or 3 hits with a Shadow. And you're able to steal a lot of games by just being able to progress out with a Shadow and backed out with like some hand disruption and a piece of interaction. So that's really what I'm hoping here. So like Thoughtseize, we see, all right, Teferi, Leyline Binding, Solitude. They've got 3 really good cards, but overall it's not like an extraordinary hand. We're able to punch a couple holes in here, especially if we can find a second land. So we'll take the Teferi. We do find the second land, so now we can take the Leyline Binding, get down to Solitude. If they want to like evoke a Solitude to get rid of this Shadow, then we get 2 more cards out of hand, and we have another Shadow if we find another land. But this is kind of what we're really hoping for. Play out the second Shadow since I have the Infernal Grasp. So if they do find like a white card to evoke to Solitude, I can Infernal Grasp the Shadow that they target. And it'll keep them from exiling it as well as grow my other Shadow. So exactly what happens here. They Solitude. I kill that one. Thoughtseize away the Keruga. And now I've just got them on like a turn or 3-turn clock. Since they didn't do anything, I'm absolutely playing out this Tireless Tracker and Tireless Tracker and praying. So if they do Solitude me, I still have a backup threat. If they don't Solitude me, then yeah, hopefully we just have a lethal dude. But opponent ends up committing Ritual Sacrifice, Fetch Shocking, offing themselves. I respect it. Hats off to you, opponent. On to match 5. All right, so we are on the play. We've got a Fatal Push into Saga Goyf. Mono Black Coffers. Really, really awful hand for us against Mono Black Coffers. Like having Goyf and Traverse and Fatal Push against Swamp Relic with like no creatures. So we really need some Saga tokens to do work for us. Unfortunately, they've got the Demolition Field that we know about, but we'll at least be able to get a token here. Blow up our Saga, yep. But it doesn't look like we're ever going to get Delirium online. But we can at At least get a confidant down, right? So now we can kind of fight over Karn if they play that out. Another Field of Ruin. So they're just going to go on the heavy strip mine plan. And March of Wretched Sorrow, my Dark Confidant. Definitely a matchup where I would like to have what's it called in the board? Veil of Summer. But I think the card overall is fairly weak, so I'm not like making a big push. So Karn ends up getting Walking Ballista. They take out our Shadow, but we find Bloodchief's Thirst to take out their Karn. And now we're back to like really not in a good spot. Since they didn't do anything relevant this turn, I'm not really interested in firing off the Thoughtseize because they've got like all the mana in the world and they didn't cast anything. So I'm pretty positive they don't have anything in hand that I care about. And since they don't have anything in hand, I'd rather save this Thoughtseize for after they pop Relic so I can maybe regrow the Tarmogoyf, but can't really do much about Damnation, right? They're down to a basic swamp, a relic pop, ton of mana. We're down to nothing. Not a thing. All right. Beseju is a magic card. We'll hold on to it for a second in case they find like a big Walking Ballista or Karn for a bridge or something. But here I'd rather just play it out and pray. But it makes a bajillion and a half mana approximately. And I think this is like March the Gigantha for 16 or something. So I just scoop it up to that because, like, I've got a Tarmogoyf, but they've got this active relic. Sideboarding, I'm taking out all the Fatal Pushes, the Infernal Grasps, stuff like that. Bringing in extra Beseju, Haywire Might. What else did I bring in? Can't remember. Cards and stuff and spells. Brought in Terra Sunders. Yeah. See? Totally know my sideboard plan. Let's stop for a second about Thoughtseize. So Thoughtseize sees. Play. Alright. Thoughtseize sees Invoke Despair, Bloodchief's Thirst, Profane Tutor, Wormcoil Engine, Field of Ruin, Cabal Coffers. So more than likely they're going to spend their next turn Field of Ruining the Urza Saga. So my goal is take the Bloodchief's Thirst so that they can't Field of Ruin my Saga and Bloodchief's Thirst my Tarmogoyf. The Invoke Despair is still like a little ways off. So I got a couple turns to figure that out. Profane Tutor, same kind of thing. I can Terrace under the Wormcoil, so I'm not huge on that. I figure if I can make the Invoke Despair bad by just having bodies and maybe like force the Profane Tutor to get a Damnation, then that can be good for me. So finding Urza Saga really helps into that like make Invoke Despair bad idea. I do get a Damnation off the Profane Tutor, okay. So now we get Thoughtseize to take the Invoke Despair. We get down Tarmogoyf. They do find another Field of Ruin and another Damnation. So we know they've got a Wormcoil still, which I've got Terra Sunder for. And I think they play the Cabal Coffers, play the Wormcoil, suspended New Profane Tutor. So the last card should be unknown. Absolutely take a Karn. Crack in with Shadow. And opponent draws dead. So we get to win that one. On to game number 3. Bitter Blossom was also one I brought in here because it's really good against like Damnation, Invoke Despair, the 1-for-1 removal. Here, reasonable hand. Doesn't really rely on the graveyard. We get like a turn 1 play. We get turn 2 Saga. Obviously, our opponent's very likely to have copies of things like Field of Ruin, but we can't really afford to like just not play our cards, right? March of Wretched Sorrow, my confidant, which is kind of okay with me because it does mean I get a construct token here. And honestly, at the end of the day, anything that lets me get bodies is kind of positive. So they get off Profane Tutor. I'm assuming they went and got like some sort of a payoff, Karn or an Invoke Despair, something like that. So I'm hoping that these Thought Seizes are going to be pretty solid. Crack in with Might in case they have like Fatal Push. I want them to use that first. So we see double Karn and a Cabal Coffers. We'll take the Karns, get Shadow down. We can use this Expedition map to go find another fetch land if we want to. But since they played out the Cabal Coffers, I'm just going to get a Beseiju to take that out. Get an attack in. We're just trying to get like card types to help out with Delirium. If our opponent does get a Damnation, then we've got this backup Urza Saga, as well as now this Bitter Blossom. So like we fight into Damnation pretty well. We've got Haywire Might to deal with like Ensnaring Bridge. Worm Coil Engine is going to be pretty annoying if they find one of those. All right, so Damnation. Again, this is pretty okay because we do just have like Urza Saga constructs plus Bitter Blossom. So we're going to take the opportunity to just do as much damage as we can here. Put them down to 1. Now they're dead to any of our 3 creatures. And they do have a Worm Coil Engine here. So I end up with an interesting draw here. Mishra's Bauble sees Karn the Great Creator off the top of their library. Draw Urza Saga, which would be what I'd likely traverse for anyway. So we've got a couple of options here. Our opponent's got 2 unknown cards in hand. If their cards are like March of Wretched Sorrow and a black card or a Fatal Push, then we want to try our best to like beat those. Option number 1 here is throw like the Shadow Spear on the fairy token, attack in, or just attack in with the fairy token. And that's lethal. Option number 2 is we could attack with everything and Assassin's Trophy to blow up the Worm Coil Engine so that they can't gain the life. And that beats Fatal Push, but it does not beat March plus black card. Or actually, let me see with the old Google. March of Wretched Sorrow. Gonna feel pretty silly if it did. So yeah, it actually did. Did beat March. So if I attack with everything, let them block Assassin's Trophy, the Worm Coil, if they have a march on like my fairy token, they can only gain 2, which means they're dead to the construct. Oh, well, if they march the construct token, then they gain 2, take 2, go back to 1, right? So yeah, it doesn't beat march plus black card on the construct token. But if they do that, I'm pretty okay with that. I could also traverse for another Haywire Might, and that would beat it, because then I just have another artifact to grow this construct token. But either way, I end up just like attacking with everything, and Assassin's Trophying the Worm Coil, and they scoop. But I could have like moved over the Shadow Spear, attacked, and I think that beats March plus Black card. So essentially, we had an opportunity to beat everything, and I did not make the line that beat everything right then and there. So just keep that in mind. Now, obviously, they did have to have a very specific set of cards to get out of it, but if you can afford to play around it, you should just about always play around it. But I did beat Karn for bridge because I would be able to traverse for a Haywire Might. So I wasn't that worried about the Karn coming down anyway. Back to the list. We ended up 4-1 that league. Some of the changes that I want to make going forward. I did like the tireless tracker, but felt like I wasn't hitting the land after the tireless tracker as much as I would want. I really don't want to go up on lands, so I'll probably end up cutting the second tireless tracker, just having it there as like a traverse target if I need it, if I'm flooding late game, and probably replace that slot with maybe another piece of versatile removal. Like, I really don't like Witherbloom command, but it might be worth the slot just to start trying to loop sagas a little bit more. In the sideboard, I think if you're not seeing creativity explicitly, that Orvar is pretty weak. And even if you are seeing creativity, like you do still just have Hand Disruption, Tarmogoyf, Shadow, like that part of your deck. So it's not like Orvar is an absolute necessity. Bitter Blossom was really good. Terra Sunder was really good. Beseiju, Haywire Might were both really solid. I don't find myself needing Bajuka Bog much, but I do like having the option with like Expedition Map and Bajuka Bog. Really good against like Murktide and random graveyard decks like that. But otherwise, if you got any suggestions, things that you think might improve the Golgari Shadow archetype, feel free to drop them in the comments down below. Otherwise, hope everybody has a fantastic rest of your day. Stay safe, enjoy some good food and company. Catch y'all back live later. We'll have the link to the stream down below. Adios for now.